Lonely rancher ordered a virgin bride, but found a widow with tears, and a voice that broke his silence. The plains stretched like an ocean of dust, a golden-brown sea undulating under the late afternoon sun. Wind scoured the horizon, carrying the scent of dry earth and scorched grass. The Marston Ranch stood alone, a weathered skeleton of wood and stone, its fences leaning like tired old men against the weight of time. A hawk circled lazily above, wings catching the dying light, casting long, fleeting shadows over the dusty corrals. Somewhere in the distance, the low, mournful bellow of cattle reached Elias Marston's ears, a sound that had once comforted him, but now only mirrored the hollowness inside. Elias moved slowly across the corral, boots scuffing the dry dirt. Every step echoed against the empty ranch house, where the wind whistled through broken windows like a ghost whispering secrets. His eyes, once sharp and lively, had dimmed. They reflected years of solitude, regrets carved into his face as deeply as the scars on his hands. Portraits of his parents stared down from the walls, their painted eyes following him with silent accusation. Dust settled over everything like forgotten memories. His old dog's bones lay buried near the oak tree, a companion long gone, leaving behind only the echo of loyalty. The sudden creak of hooves on the dry path startled him. A rider approached, hunched and trembling, carrying a telegram in hand. Elias took it wordlessly, fingers brushing the rough paper, and unfolded the message. The words struck him with strange dissonance. A bride had been sent, an innocent, a virgin, meant to restore companionship and honor to the Marston name. The rancher's chest tightened with anticipation, yet unease slithered up his spine like a cold snake. Shadows lengthened across the corral, the sun dipping behind distant mesas, painting the landscape in strokes of amber and blood. He imagined her arrival, skirts white as fresh snow, eyes wide with innocence, trembling hands held against a heart unscathed by life. Yet the wind whispered warnings, rustling through the creaking fence posts, carrying a foreboding note he could not ignore. By the creek, Elias paused. The water rippled across jagged stones, fracturing his reflection into fragments. Hollow eyes, stoic jaw, a man split by grief and solitude. The air smelled faintly of rain, though the sky remained clear. Then, on the horizon, a figure appeared, a solitary silhouette walking the dusty trail toward him. At first he thought it the maiden of the telegram, but as she drew closer, the truth revealed itself. She was draped in black, her veil torn and fluttering in the wind, the hem of her skirt streaked with dirt. Her hair clung to her cheeks, damp with dust and sweat, and streaks of tears had carved lines down her face. In the hollow silence of the plains her voice rose raw and trembling, and it seemed to still the wind itself. "Sir, I am Leora," she whispered, voice cracking under the weight of unspoken tragedies. Elias's breath caught. The words struck like bullets against the walls of his solitude. Every muscle tensed, yet he could not step forward. The ranch, the plains, even the hawk above seemed to hold its breath. He had expected innocence. He had received survival, grief, and fire tempered into fragile human form. Her footsteps faltered in the dust, but she kept moving, each step a defiance against the world that had already taken so much from her. Elias watched, a strange knot of dread and fascination tightening in his chest. She paused at the edge of the creek, her reflection mingling with his fractured one, shadow meeting shadow. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence between them was loud with meaning, grief recognized, solitude mirrored, futures unformed. Finally, he lowered his eyes, voice hoarse, words weighed with years of unspoken emotion. "You are no bride I expected." Her lips quivered into the barest of smiles, fragile as a sparrow's wing, and the wind carried it across the water, scattering it like seeds over the plains. And in that moment the stillness of the ranch broke, replaced by a tremor, something new, something dangerous, something alive. The sun fell fully behind the mesas, casting the world into the muted gold of twilight. Elias and the woman in black faced each other across the creek, two solitary figures on a lonely land. The silence finally giving way to the first words of a story neither had chosen, but both could not escape. The first light of dawn spilled over the plains, painting the horizon in streaks of amber and burnt sienna. Dust clung to the Marston ranch like a persistent shadow, and the wind carried the faint scent of scorched wood and dry hay. Leora moved with slow, careful steps, her skirts brushing the dirt, eyes alert and wary. Every creak of floorboard underfoot seemed to echo in the empty halls of the house, bouncing back her own heartbeat. Elias watched from the doorway, his figure stiff, a silhouette of a man used to silence. The bride he had imagined, innocent, pliant, untouched by life's cruelties, was gone. In her place stood this fragile yet unyielding woman, her shoulders squared against the memory of fire and death, her voice already carving itself into the quiet air of the ranch. Over a sparse breakfast of bread and strong coffee, she spoke in low, measured tones. Her story unfolded in whispers, almost afraid to break the fragile morning. Marauders had come like shadows, sweeping through her homestead, leaving flames and screams in their wake. Her husband, a gentleman, had been caught in the fire she could not reach. Leora's hands shook slightly as she recounted the blaze, smoke still lingering in her nostrils in memory, the smell of charred timber clinging to her fingers. Her tears were quiet, yet each word carried a melody of survival, a defiance that refused to be silenced. Elias's chest tightened, not with pity, but with recognition. Pain spoke to pain. His own years of solitude, of watching loved ones slip away into silence, mirrored hers. He found himself drawn to her, not by beauty, which was secondary, but by the gravity of her grief, the steel beneath her vulnerability. Their first days together were quiet, almost painfully ordinary. They worked side by side, mending fences whose posts sagged like tired spines, feeding the cattle whose numbers dwindled with each passing season, repairing the barn doors warped by storms. Their footsteps echoed across the empty halls, a tentative rhythm of trust forming in silence. Glances lingered longer than necessary. Hands brushed over the edge of a tool, sparks crackling in the air like gunpowder waiting to ignite. Storm clouds gathered one evening, heavy and low, promising rain. Leora paused on the porch, staring out across the plains as wind tugged at her hair. "How long?" she asked, voice raw, cutting through the still air. "Will you wait for life to come to you?" Her words struck him deeper than any bullet could, shattering the stoicism he had worn like armor. Elias's jaw tightened, his hands, calloused and scarred, clenched. He wanted to answer, but no words came. Instead, he merely stood, letting the wind carry the weight of her question. Night fell, and the storm broke. Rain pelted the roof in relentless sheets, rattling the windows, making the walls tremble. They sat side by the fireplace, flames dancing and throwing shadows across the worn wooden walls. The room smelled of smoke, damp earth, and the faint trace of Leora's lavender. Silence hung between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Words were unnecessary. The unspoken flowed like the creek outside, carrying grief, longing, and something tender that neither had yet named. Elias observed her profile, the curve of her jaw, the way her eyes caught the firelight. But it was not desire that stirred. It was understanding, empathy forged in shared loneliness. And Leora, sensing his gaze, did not flinch. She leaned back slightly, letting her hair fall loose over her shoulders, a silent gesture of trust. The flames reflected in her eyes like twin storms contained within glass, a fragile defiance against the world's cruelty. Outside, the wind moaned through the rafters, rattling the loose shutters. The cattle lowed in the distance, the storm hammering the plains. And yet in that dimly lit room time slowed. Here, there were no marauders, no fire, no grief pressing in from the outside world, only the fragile, forbidden connection that had begun to take root between them. Elias finally let his hand rest on the table, close to hers, fingertips nearly touching. The spark was subtle, almost invisible, yet it was there, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond forming in the quiet ashes of two lonely lives. The widow's voice had broken his silence, but it was the shared silences afterward, filled with tentative trust. that began to reconstruct the pieces of his fractured heart. The fire crackled louder, a single log splitting with a sharp snap echoing across the empty halls. And in that sound, both of them felt the weight of what was to come. Danger, desire, and a slow-burning intimacy that neither dared name aloud. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, two hearts began their fragile, dangerous dance. Together, but not yet united, the sky darkened with sudden ferocity, clouds roiling like smoke from 1,000 fires. A violent storm rolled across the plains, wind shrieking through the fence posts and rattling the shutters of the Marston Ranch like the wails of the dead. Rain lashed the earth with relentless force, hammering the rooftops, turning the dirt paths into rivers of mud. Lightning tore across the horizon, fracturing the sky into jagged silver lines, each flash illuminating the contours of the land and the tense figures moving within it. Elias guided Leora into the barn, their boots sinking into soft mud as the storm attacked the plains with unbridled fury. The smell of wet wood mingled with the faint trace of hay, and the timbers groaned as though the old structure were straining against the sky itself. Leora's hands trembled as she gripped a beam for support, and Elias noticed the way her eyes darted nervously to the corners of the barn, haunted not by the storm outside, but by memories she could not escape. The fire that had taken her husband years ago resurfaced in her every movement. The crackling flames in her mind, the heat of burning timber, the smell of charred wood still clinging to her fingers. Her lips moved, whispering fragments of that terrible night. Marauders, screams, smoke curling into a sky that never seemed wide enough to hold it. Elias listened, heart tight, as if he could absorb her grief into his own chest, as if her losses were his to carry as well. The ranch itself seemed alive, thrumming with chaos. The creek, swollen by the storm, spilled over its banks, rushing across the fields with a roar, sweeping away loose hay and flattening the grazing grass. The cattle bellowed in panic, thrashing against their pens, horns scraping wood, hooves churning mud into slurry. Walls shivered under the onslaught of wind, and the barn doors rattled violently as if the storm itself sought to dismantle the refuge he had built. Elias sprang into action, hands gripping soaked boards and nails, muscles straining as he and Leora reinforced the fences, hammered loose planks, and guided the frightened livestock into makeshift pens. Their sweat mingled with rain, mud streaking their faces, breaths ragged, hearts hammering in tandem. Each movement was a shared rhythm, a tacit understanding forming between them. She was no longer merely a guest at his ranch. She was a force, alive and dangerous in her resilience, and he could not ignore the pulse she brought to his desolate world. But even amidst survival, human cruelty found a way in. Neighbors, huddled behind their fences and shutters, whispered and gossiped, their voices riding the wind with cruel intent. "A man taking a widow under his roof," one sneered. "What kind of respect can he command now?" Elias's jaw tightened, hands clenching as the sting of their judgment cut deeper than any storm. When he confronted them, voice low and sharp, words slicing through the rain-soaked air like a whip, their smirks faltered. Leora watched, heart trembling, at this rare glimpse of Elias's anger. So controlled usually, so silent, now unleashed with protective ferocity. Hours passed, the storm beginning to subside, leaving the land sodden and glistening. By nightfall, exhaustion claimed them both, and the barn settled into an uneasy calm, the only sound the gentle drip of water from the rafters and the soft, labored breathing of two survivors. Elias climbed to the loft to check the hayloft, and there he found her, Leora, curled beneath a threadbare blanket, damp hair matted against her cheeks, lips slightly parted as she slept. He did not speak, did not reach for her. He merely watched, the storm's fury outside echoing the turmoil inside his chest. Something unexpected and dangerous had begun to stir, a forbidden love, tender and frightening, growing in the quiet aftermath of survival. In that loft, amidst the scent of wet hay and the memory of fire, Elias allowed himself a single moment of clarity. The woman beneath him, fragile yet unbroken, had shifted the balance of his solitude. Outside, the creek still rushed, the wind still moaned through the fence posts, But inside the barn, a tentative peace settled between them. Their hearts beat in proximity, silent confessions in every glance and movement. And though neither spoke, Elias knew with a certainty he had long denied. This widow, with fire in her soul and grief in her eyes, had claimed a part of him he thought dead long ago. The plains had just begun to recover from the storm, the mud drying under a wary sun, when a rider appeared on the horizon. Dust kicked up beneath hooves, the figure hunched and deliberate, carrying the aura of danger like a shadow draped over the land. Elias watched, squinting against the glare, a cold knot of unease forming in his chest. The rider drew closer, and as he dismounted, the brim of his hat shadowing a face both sharp and seasoned, the name he spoke sent a chill that cut deeper than any winter wind. "Elias Marston," the man said, voice dry and precise. "I'm here for Leora." Leora's head lifted, eyes flashing with both fear and fury. The man, a bounty hunter of merciless reputation, claimed that her late husband had owed debts to ruthless men, and now those debts had become her burden. Elias's quiet life, carved from decades of solitude, erupted into chaos. The wind shifted, carrying the metallic tang of fear as horses snorted, their nostrils flaring, ears twitching at every movement. Fires sparked in the fields, lanterns tipped by gusts, casting dancing shadows across the corrals like ghosts of imminent danger. Leora moved with surprising decisiveness. Her hands were steady on reins, her eyes hard and unflinching as she mounted a horse beside Elias. No longer the fragile widow of yesterday, she was a storm contained in human form. Together, they navigated the plains, side by side, every instinct sharpened by urgency, the rhythm of trust forming in the chaos. Each decision, a fallen log avoided, a twisting path through the flood-swollen creek, was a testament to the fire she carried within. Elias found himself listening, respecting her intuition, marveling at the strength she had carved from grief. But danger is rarely external alone. In the town, a neighbor's envy festered like rot in the warm sun. Whispers spread like wildfire, the rancher and the widow. "What scandalous talk," they said, aiming to sever the fragile bond that had begun to bloom. Elias felt the sting, a bitter reminder that survival and love were often beset from every angle. At the edge of the corral, under the cover of dusk, the bounty hunter's shadow loomed again. A shot rang out, echoing like thunder across the plains. In the chaos, a brief, stolen kiss occurred, a desperate, unguarded collision of lips that carried the weight of fear, longing, and something dangerously forbidden. Time slowed. Hearts thundered, eyes locked in a wordless confession. A fire sparked in the cold night air. They retreated to the stables, soaked with rain runoff, mud streaking boots and hands. Words were unnecessary. Every glance, every tightened jaw, every brush of fingers along a post carried accusation, longing, and unspoken fear. Elias felt the weight of his own grief, mirrored in Leora's haunted eyes, mingling with the desire that neither had permission to indulge. By the night's end, the bounty hunter fled, horse hooves striking sparks from stone, gun smoke lingering in the damp air. Yet the threat remained palpable, a dark veil stretched over the plains like unseen hands reaching, patient and inevitable. Elias and Leora stood in the corral, faces illuminated by lantern light, breath ragged from exertion and adrenaline. They understood, silently, that the world outside was unforgiving. But together, they had survived. Together, perhaps, they could endure whatever darkness remained. The wind whispered through the rafters, carrying the scent of wet earth, smoke, and distant danger. Their hands brushed again, briefly, charged with the knowledge that the bond formed in fire and fear could not be broken easily. They would need each other, her courage, his protection, to navigate the storm-laden path ahead. The plains were vast, wild, and merciless. Yet within the chaos they had found a fragile, defiant unity. And as the moon rose, casting pale silver over mud and fence, Elias realized the truth he had long denied. Survival meant more than enduring the land. It meant risking heart and soul, facing betrayal and allowing love to ignite amidst shadows. The sky boiled with sudden fury. Dark clouds ripped by jagged forks of lightning that cracked the horizon in blinding bursts. A single bolt struck the old barn, igniting the dry timbers like a torch flung into the heart of the ranch. Flames roared, consuming wood and hay with a voice older than the plains themselves, black smoke billowing skyward, swallowing the horizon in a choking curtain. The smell of burning timber mixed with the copper tang of frightened livestock, filling the air with urgency and fear. Elias moved before thought, heart pounding, muscles taut. Leora was at his side in an instant, eyes wide but resolute, hands steady as they worked in unison to corral panicked horses and cattle. The chaos pressed against them from all sides. Sparks rained down, smoke burned their eyes, and the wind threatened to topple weakened beams. Yet their movements were fluid, instinctive, two bodies responding to danger as if rehearsed for lifetimes. Every snap of timber, every roar of the fire, seemed to echo a confession neither dared speak aloud. Hours passed in a blur of smoke and sweat. When at last the flames yielded, leaving only blackened timbers and smoldering ashes, silence fell like a gentle benediction. The plains were littered with ash, white and gray against the burned earth, a strange landscape of death and renewal. Leora sank to her knees, hands trembling, face streaked with soot and tears. For the first time, she let herself grieve fully, the weight of her past spilling into the open. Elias knelt beside her, hesitant at first, then cautiously wrapping a hand around hers. His touch was gentle, almost foreign, yet it carried a tenderness that startled them both. Words came in fragments, confessions spilling from cracked lips. Loneliness endured, guilt carried, longing suppressed. Fingers brushed, then entwined, the spark between them igniting in a slow, dangerous flame, undeniable and consuming. Neighbors, drawn by the glow of fire and the smell of smoke, lingered at a respectful distance. They watched silently, some nodding, others murmuring approval. This union, born from peril, grief and survival, had earned a place in their eyes as something sacred, even if unconventional. Elias rose, surveying the wreckage of his barn, heart heavy yet resolute. He acknowledged the truth. The bride he had expected, the naive promise of innocence, had never come. Yet fate, cruel and whimsical, had delivered something stronger, something real, something capable of sustaining love and life amidst desolation. Leora, voice trembling but steady, whispered into the wind. Her words carried across the plains. I forgive you. And myself. The wind seemed to respond, rustling the ashen grass, swirling it around their boots like a blessing. Elias felt it, the weight of absolution, and he knew in that instant that their bond was no longer tentative. It was a living, breathing force, tempered in fire and sorrow, yet unbroken. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, painting the scorched earth with the soft glow of twilight. In the quiet aftermath, two figures stood together amidst the ruins, hands still entwined, hearts beating in tandem, gazing at the infinite expanse before them. There were no promises made aloud, none were needed. The fire had spoken, the ashes had answered. And in that balance between destruction and renewal, Elias and Leora had found not just survival, but redemption. Winter draped the Marston Ranch in a quiet, pristine shroud. Snow lay soft over fences and fields, muffling the world in gentle silence. Each step across the frozen ground left crisp impressions, white dust swirling in the cold air. The creek had surrendered to frost, a silver ribbon stretching across the plains, reflecting the low, pale sun. Smoke curled lazily from the barn's chimney, carrying the scent of burning pine, warm and protective against the biting cold. The barn itself stood stronger, timber reinforced, a testament to resilience born from fire and struggle. Livestock grazed in orderly pens, their breath rising in misty clouds, oblivious to the long winters past. Elias moved through the house, pausing at corners heavy with memory. Here the echo of past grief lingered, yet now it mingled with life restored. Leora stood by the window, hands pressed against the cold glass, watching snowflakes tumble and melt in the distance. Their days had grown into quiet rhythm, early mornings with coffee steaming between them, evenings by the fire listening to the wind hum across the plains. The world beyond their walls seemed less threatening, Its chaos kept at bay by the walls they had rebuilt, both physical and invisible. Finally, in the soft gold of sunset, Elias spoke aloud the words he had carried in silence for years. "I don't love what the world thinks I should," he said, voice low but steady, each syllable deliberate. "I love what stands here, beside me through fire and silence." Leora turned, tears catching the last light like fractured diamonds. A smile curved her lips, carrying both the weight of mourning and the buoyancy of joy. She reached out, and their hands met lightly, fingers entwining in an emblem of survival and quiet triumph. No grand declarations were needed. Their shared history, trials, and trust spoke volumes that words could not. They rode together atop a ridge as the last sun dipped beyond the horizon. Horses grazed below, nostrils flaring, tails swishing lazily. Hawks circled above, wings slicing the crisp blue sky, shadows drifting over the snow-blanketed plains. The wind whispered through their hair, carrying with it echoes of past storms, fires, and grief, now softened by endurance. From the ridge, the ranch stretched endlessly, every fence post, every patch of grass, every frozen creek a testament to love forged in adversity. In the quiet tableau, two hearts intertwined, their breaths misting in the cold, a subtle rhythm marking the life they had rebuilt together. The camera of imagination pans outward, capturing the expansive plains, the resilience of human spirit, and the warmth of a bond that had weathered every storm. In the snow's reflection, grief had melted, replaced by hope, laughter, and devotion that would endure through seasons yet to come. Elias and Leora stood side by side, not as two solitary figures, but as a living emblem of legacy, a love that survived fire, storm, and shadow, and now thrived on the plains they called home.